I have to tell you, in today's market, it's not easy running an auto parts store. There's a couple of reasons. One, it's very competitive, but the other thing is, I would like to ask, where in the world has quality control gone? Okay, and I'm sure any of you have been involved with auto parts sales or auto parts reselling. You're going to say, oh, Kent, I hear what you're saying. You know, it's ridiculous. We're talking even factory parts that come in factory OE boxes. They're not right. They don't fit. And then you talk about aftermarket products and you're going to like shake your head. I know why some people say, well, I'll only buy OE, but the problem is a lot of these parts like Mercedes-Benz, they don't make these parts. They still farm them out even though they put the Mercedes sticker on them. Of course, they have a little bit better quality control, but what I'm seeing today is a lot of times the parts that a factory will sell for old cars, I'm talking about older cars, are the same parts that you're going to get in the aftermarket. So, you know, where does this end? And I feel sorry for big companies who sell tons of parts and they have no quality control on their end. You know, they're expecting the manufacturer to control the quality, but then they're just getting the parts, they're not even opening the boxes and they're shipping them out. I feel sorry for some of those companies. I can't imagine how many returns they have to deal with. Remember, these returns cost us all because sellers have to charge enough to deal with all these returns from faulty and bogus parts. And I'm going to show you a couple things today that I'm dealing with. One of the things we do here at Mercedessource is we pride ourselves in not being a parts house. We don't just sell parts. Otherwise, I'd be dealing with some of these same issues. We try to sell solutions, and if we're selling parts, we have to make sure the parts work. Otherwise, they're not a solution. And I've got a couple parts here on the bench. These are just a couple examples of what we do here at Mercedessource, but I want to tell you that when we get parts in, we check them over, and I don't know anybody else who does that. I'm sure a lot of sellers on eBay don't even look at the stuff they're selling, and certainly on some of those big parts houses, they're not checking what I'm checking. You're going to be surprised at what you see. Now, this isn't stuff that's made in China. I'm looking at an oil pan here. This is a Febby Bilstein oil pan for an older diesel engine. It says right here, made in Italy. So you can't just point your finger at China. All over Europe, even the US, you see things that are being built and you're thinking, who in the world is minding the store? Is anybody paying attention to quality control? So let me show you. These are just a couple, but there's a number of things that we put together here in our warehouses, our shop. I have to check them. I have to bring these parts out here. And we literally have to remanufacture them in a very small way. Let me show you two examples now. Let me start with this oil pan. I'm not saying this oil pan is bad. When you look at it, the quality looks really good on this oil pan. But it has a couple little teeny flaws that can drive the installer absolutely crazy. And that's the case with so many of these things. The parts aren't bad themselves. There's just a couple little things that were missed at the factory that can cause great grief for the purchaser. And for this particular pan, it's located right here. Take a look at this surface right here, where the pan bolt plug goes in. That's supposed to be a perfectly flat surface, so the bolt sealing ring will seal right in this area. Well, look at that. There's a flaw. There's roughness right there. There's a raised nipple right there. So some poor guy installs this pan and he goes to tighten it down, it's going to leak. Can you imagine how frustrating that is? Just a small thing right there. Just that right there can cause so much trouble. The other problem is when you go to install the pan plug, it doesn't go in. It locks up down here. So some guy is reefing on this. He's going to end up stripping the threads. So what we have to do here in our shop before we ship this pan out to our customers is we have to come in here. We use these fine sanding discs on the little air die grinder, and we have to polish this. Literally have to polish this flat, and then we have to repaint it. Then I have the correct tap, and we have to go through here and tap this so we can actually get the bolt in. So we check every one of these. Do you know how frustrating that is for us here, and what kind of time that adds to being able to sell these pans to our customers? Now I'm going to go out now in the shop and give this to my mechanic. He's going to clean this up and tap it, and then we'll come back and show you the finished product. Now I want to show you the next one that can cause you real grief if you own a W126. This is the brake control rod support joint that's on all W126 front suspensions. There's that long threaded rod that you adjust for your front end alignment. But this bolts under the car, and it's on a large aluminum casting, which is in turn bolted up to the subframe. And this has a long rod going out to your lower control arm. So anytime you start getting movement or you hear clunking in the front end, it's usually because this ball joint right in here wears out. And if you own a W126, plan on replacing this if you haven't already. And I'm sure all you 126 owners out there, half of you have probably said, yeah, I've already replaced that part. Because they wear out. They just literally wear out on all W126s. Now this is a Febby Bilstein part that we resell. And recently we had one of our customers run into a problem, and then we found out that there was a manufacturing flaw, not in the support joint. There's nothing wrong with this. But the problem is in these brackets here. These are hidden locking nut brackets that go up into the subframe, and you use the long bolts to bolt that aluminum casting back onto the subframe after you install this joint in that aluminum casting. And these have to lock because you don't want the bolts coming out. But notice how they're made. There's just a very light tack weld or squeeze crimp on these into this bracket. But here's the problem. When they machine these threads and they smash down, I'm going to say smash down because that's what they've done. They've collapsed the upper part of these threads here to provide a locking nut for the bolt. Now watch what happens when I install the bolt. Let's say you're getting ready to install this back onto the subframe. You slip this into a hidden notched cutout in the subframe and you push it in like this. And then from underneath, you'll start to install the long bolt. This isn't the actual bolt. This is just a small bolt with the same threads. And everything is going fine until you get to about that point. Now notice, I'm not even halfway through the threads of this nut here, and this bolt has already locked up. So the poor guy gets a big wrench on it and starts twisting this, and guess what happens? This is what happens. The nut breaks off and spins. And of course, this is up in a hidden cavity in the subframe, and then you have a big wrench dance. I mean, this is something that can really make you weep if this happens to you. And I don't want this to happen to anybody. I had this happen a couple times because the bolts were rusty, and when I tried to remove them, these spun off. And about all you can do is get a Sawzall out and enlarge the hole in that hidden cavity and then get in there with some sort of a tool. I even had to make a special tool to get in through that hole to hold on to this while you either get this bolt on or off. So my goal in providing solutions for my customers is I never want this to happen to anybody. It becomes such a huge problem to fix the issue. So guess what we have to do? Had to get a special tap, and we have to take each one of these and carefully tap them. Now remember, when we remanufacture these for our customers, we can't take this tap and run it all the way through. If we just run it all the way through cleanly, we're going to lose the locking ability of this nut. It has to be a self-locking nut because you do not want those bolts backing up. So we have to set this up in a vise. We have to actually measure the amount that we run this tap into so that when we test each one with the bolt, we got to make sure the bolt goes in, but not all the way in by hand, that it actually gets up towards the top before it locks in. So you see at this point, if the owner or mechanic is installing these bolts into these brackets, he's going to get to this point and he's going to be able to tighten this down and it's going to lock the bolt without ripping this nut out of the bracket. This is a great one because what we're doing here is we're taking a little extra time to solve a huge problem for the customer out there who may get these. You buy these from some other company, buy these, and you don't know what's happening. You start trying to force that bolt. If you get one of these and you start forcing that bolt in there, stop. Do not force the bolt into these brackets, or you're going to end up breaking off this nut, and you're going to have what I've said over and over is a huge, big wrench dance. So there's another example of what we have to do here at Mercedessource to make sure that the parts we ship out to you are going to work for you, and they're going to be able to be installed without tears running down your cheeks. So that's just 2 parts. We've got other things that we have to do here as we check parts, and every day it seems like we're seeing an issue with some other part that we have to double check, and that takes a lot of our time here in the shop. Now I've just finished up on that oil pan. Let me show you the finished product. It took about 15 to 20 minutes to work that pan over, so it's going to come to you and work properly when you install the oil pan. So here is the diesel oil pan remanufactured by Mercedessource. We've smoothed off this area here and repainted it so there'll be a good seal on that sealing ring. And now watch the bolt. Can you imagine how frustrating it would be to have to remove, trying to drain the oil with oil running down your arm and having a bolt that would come out real hard? I like these pan bolts to come out easily. So there you have it. That's what we have to do here. We do this every day in the shop here at Mercedessource. We have to remanufacture parts made by other manufacturers. If you need an oil pan like this, or you need 126 support rod joints, I'll put links in the description of this video.